most insane people are now saying what sane is, and this is a problem, particularly for conservatives. In this video, I'm going to look at the takeover of psychology by the far left and why that's an issue for the rest of us. Okay, first up, there's absolutely no doubt that psychology as a field is massively left-leaning. Since I did my degree at university many years ago, this was definitely the case then. It's also very feminine, which tends to correlate with left-leaning. It tends to come from a particular worldview. So most of the psychologists in the world are liberal. The vast majority of them are far left American liberals particularly. And this is a problem for the rest of us. Why? That group of people are the most mentally ill. So there's plenty of data on this now. There's plenty of studies. I won't bore you with the details, but you can look them up. The people on the left are less happy and more mentally ill. Arguments about correlation causation, arguments about why this is. I've got some lefty friends who say, it's because we just face reality and ignorance is bliss. I don't believe that's the case, okay? My experience of this is what causes the left to be mentally ill is a lack of the most sanifying, is a lack of the anchors that lead us to be well. Those anchors are the body, community, ecology, and spirituality. I'll go through those one at a time and show how the left not having those anchors is just driving them completely nuts. And we shouldn't put the insane people in charge of the asylum. Sound a bit crazy like that myself, don't I? All right. So who am I? My name's Mark Walsh, honors degree in psychology from years ago. I've been working with many coaches, psychologists, trainers, all people in this field for many years, from yoga teachers, meditation. I've interviewed over 700 of them. I've explored many kinds of psychology. I started a trauma charity in the Ukraine, so quite a bit of experience to speak to in regard to this. Over my life, I've gradually become more conservative, as many people do. I think part of that journey is seeing that that's what keeps people sane and well. Yeah, if I look at the people I know who are most unwell, they tend to be on the left. Increasingly, the left has also gone a bit off the rails. Is this fair to say? I think, do we need to look up the studies to see this? If you go to a pride march, do you see really well people? Your friend who's a really radical leftist, do they not have mental health problems? Certainly the data backs this up. We are living in the most mentally ill society potentially that's ever lived, that's ever existed, ever anywhere, and also the most mentally ill society as far as we can tell that's perhaps ever existed at any point in human history. We're doing something that sends us insane. Part of that has been a move towards the left over the years. Culture's gone more and more left. Till very recently, there might be a little bit of a change back, but until very recently, since, I don't know, the Middle Ages, this is not just a phenomenon, certainly that ramped up in the 60s, but it's not just a modern phenomenon. Almost all of your ancestors would be more conservative than you. Half the world in the West is still conservative by some measure, and most of the world is still conservative. So that's the first thing to say, is what I'm talking about here is normal psychology, yeah? Sometimes hippies who idealize indigenous traditions are actually quite shocked at how conservative they are, for example, because this is just like most of your ancestors had a conservative way of thinking. We've decided to do something new and radical. I think it's fair to say that it's not working when it comes to the mental health and well-being of people. This is a real problem, particularly in that many of these psychologists work with conservative people, sometimes like soldiers with PTSD or police or firemen. Half the population still, most of the world is taking on this view where it's just not really appropriate. And as I said, it's leading to worse mental health, right? It's leading to people being crazy, particularly like guys ending themselves. This is a huge issue in the West, huge issue. And it's not going to be solved by a sort of feminine liberal approach of you just need to talk about your feelings. That's what you need to do. Be more feminine, more liberal. That's the solution. It's not the solution. So to be clear, this problem is literally killing people. This problem is killing people because we don't have psychologists who can connect to conservative people, and they're pushing an agenda which actually makes people less well. At the very least, we could say that there's a bias, right? That is, I think it's 90% of psychologists are left-leaning. You can look it up. It's a huge bias, and that's going to miss out, at the very least, part of human experience. Yeah, part of human experience. I think we can go more radical than that, though, in saying the current leftist worldview, which is the sort of normie cultural worldview now. I'm not just talking about like radical activists. I'm talking about what the BBC says or what's on mainstream movies. That's actually leading us to be mentally unwell. Why? It's pushing a view of the individual as a lonely, isolated individual who's also a victim. Yeah? So the current leftist worldview is either hyper-individuated, which is super unhealthy because we're community-based animals, like this sort of lone psychologist, American culture, super individuated, or it's communitarian, but in a way which stresses victimhood and or guilt. Right? So it's like either we're bad people because we're white people and we have sort of this new kind of original sin that's incredibly difficult that you can't overcome in any way. You should always be flagellating yourself, always be guilty. Or we're such victims, we're so poor victims. And that's like psychology 101 is agency, like mental health 101, leadership 101. I've taught this in so many contexts. Addiction recovery 101 is like, okay, I need to take responsibility. Yeah, and this is a very conservative way of looking at things now. Not, oh, he did the bad thing because of his trauma and it's not his fault. Yeah, it's not your fault. My friend actually wrote a book on psychology with that title. If you're out there, Alex, shame. Gabor Mate is a classic of this. He's a far left activist at this point. There's no doubt about it. One of the biggest names in the trauma world. He's got some good things to say. I don't hate the guys. I've interacted with him a few times. He seems like a decent human being, but he's very much in this like it's not your fault mindset, rather than no, you need to take responsibility. It's not just the social conditions, things you're powerless about. Now, there's a balance here, right? Because, for example, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they also have surrender. They also have a higher power. There's a surrender there, but there's also a taking responsibility. The serenity to change, the serenity to accept the things you can't change, as well as the courage to change the things you can. That's the yin-yang balance, which at the very least, psychology needs to reclaim that. So, this is where you have acceptance and commitment therapy as a type of therapy. That's super important. If we just have the feminine side of victimhood, it just doesn't work. The other thing to say here, I think is the key feature of the mental ill health of the psychological left, is lack of boundaries. So boundaries define good mental health. What you say no to, not having addictions, having a sense of boundaries in nationhood defines mental health. Having some sense of no, not just everything's permissible, everything's allowable. The liberal worldview says it's all good. You have to be free. The most important thing is your freedom and do what you want. And it's sort of like a child's view of freedom. It's like a kid who wants to eat all the sweets and doesn't know it'll make them sick. A conservative view of mental health, a conservative psychology would say what defines our wellness is our commitments, our communities, and our boundaries. These are the key things, I think, for a conservative psychological approach, right? What is universal? Jordan Peterson, for example, has lent on Jung and archetypes. I think he stopped short on a number of things, but he's at least added that. What is universal there, rather than what are our communities? What are the importance of family and extended family? Yes, that's nationhood. That's normal and healthy, as opposed to demonizing that. Yeah. So the left either is hyper individualistic or it's communitarian, but in this way, which is like guilt-ridden or just to do with victimhood, right? As opposed to saying, yes, I'm part of a tribe, I'm part of an extended family, I'm part of a nation that has boundaries, that have borders, that is good. Studies show that conservatives are happier. I think a lot of this comes down to the fact the co-regulation, psychologists call it, of being in community. Mass migration is dysregulatory. I know this as a migrant, and I know this from being around migrants in the UK. I know it from both sides. Being a migrant is dysregulating. It wrecks your nervous system. It means you're on edge. You're in fight-flight mode. Being around migrants puts you in fight-flight mode. You're like, no, I love difference. It's like, well, yeah, I get it. Liberals have that openness to difference. That's part of their strength. However, most of us like a sense of predictability, sameness, community, connection. There's so many ways of saying it. Of course, some change is good. Some variety is good. But we're living in a time of far too much variety, far too much change. We need stability, yeah? We need consistency. We need shared values and norms. Trying to be mentally well in a culture without shared values and norms, except, of course, consumer capitalism, right? We all like to buy stuff. That's going to make us crazy. Key thing here is actually also they're looking at virtue. So most modern leftist psychology is materialistic, sort of Marxist paradigm, doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in spirituality. It has no basis for virtue. So traditional psychology, whether it would be the Greeks or traditional Catholic anthropology, for example, would say that what we need is to align with the divine. Yeah, pagans would be like, the gods, perhaps, some pagan version. I'm less versed in that. But certainly any traditionalist point of view, he says our mental health depends upon our virtue. And this is common sense. Psychologists rarely talk about this, though, because their paradigm is not about goodness. The good has been thrown out. The good, the true, and the beautiful have been thrown out, actually, by modern psychology. Modern leftist psychology is ugly. It doesn't believe in aesthetics. It says, no, health at any size. You can be fat and beautiful. Come on. Truth, it says it's all subjective. That just drives everyone nuts, saying, everything, it's my truth, and I identify as this. The over-subjectivity, the over-emphasis on, I can just decide what reality is. That's going to send us all nuts, right? We need some sense of the truth. And goodness, that's the big one they're missing to me. Virtue ethics, actually saying like doing good things makes you well. And we all know this, right? This is also in Buddhist psychology, by the way. The more you are virtuous, the more you are mentally well. Yeah, if you steal, you look over your shoulder. If you murder, you worry about people murdering you. Like the left has lost all sense of goodness while weirdly claiming this moral virtue just based on nothing. Based on nothing, right? Based on they use the right words. That's not virtue. Yeah. Based on identity, like you were born a certain way. That's not virtue. You haven't behaved in a certain way. So I think bringing back virtue is absolutely key to a conservative psychology, bringing back a healthy sense of boundaries. Some of it's just looking at the traditional psychological models through a conservative lens. If you take someone like Adam Lane Smith, for example, I think one of the best conservative psychologists out there, there's like 2 or 3 of us. It's not very many of us, but he's really good. He looks at attachment theory, for example. And attachment theory is like, maybe don't sleep with 500 women. Maybe that's going to cause you problems with your attachment, right? Sometimes we just need to look at the traditional psychology and say, let's look at that through a conservative lens. This is why marriage makes sense. This is why committed relationships make sense, right? It's not just like sex is a sport. Shag anyone you want. Let's have fun. Again, this kind of like teenage, childlike version of boundaryless freedom that actually doesn't make anyone free. It's like, she talked to a modern neuroscientist called Anna Lemke about this. She's from Stanford, I said. And she basically said it outright. She said, doing what you want all the time makes you miserable. It makes you addicted and miserable. You can see that interview online. Like, this is basic brain science, right? So I think looking at this for a conservative lens. By the way, liberals and conservatives do have different brains when they do them under studies, but, again, cause and effect. Okay, so what from a conservative point of view does lead to good mental health? Let's go through those 4 connections again. I call this the tetrarchy model. First one, reconnecting to your body. Absolutely essential. You have some in body practice. You see a lot of right-wing guys are like weightlifting, doing martial arts. Absolutely fantastic for their mental health. Yeah, a lot of the intellectual left are just living up in their head theoretically. You can see this, right? You look at the physicality of what's that blue-haired weirdo called? Just like gross and a bit fat and like looking unhealthy, and they're vaping, and like all the left-wing YouTubers look terrible. They look terrible. I think aesthetics are going to be part of what leads people into this. But that's the basic, right? Basic anchor, physical health. Most mental health issues aren't mental. They're not to do with brain chemistry. They're not to do with squirky thinking. That's what the left says, right? The left says, oh, it's your brain chemistry, it's your thinking patterns. No, it's not. It's physical. And if it's not physical, it's spiritual. So that's the other thing that leads to good mental health, is having a strong spiritual connection, some strong sense of divinity, and around that, community. Very difficult to do in a multicultural society. That's why everyone in London is nuts. Very difficult to co-regulate with people that don't have your little body language cues, shared values, shared norms, even shared language. Like, I have this living in another country. There's like a little bit of dysregulation a lot of the time. Right? Like, oh, the person didn't smile. It's a bit awkward to communicate. That adds up. That really adds up. So, I'm not saying this to like demonize myself or anyone else, but it's not ideal. It's not ideal. Yeah. So strong spiritual connection. I see that here, by the way, in Czechia, Poland, Slovenia, Croatia. That makes people way saner than the West. Like good, Catholic, really like very good for mental health. Very good. The other connection is to land. Okay, so you can look at this like a hippie, you call it eco-regulation sometimes. I think conservatives have that sense of, their hands in the soil. It's why, farmers are so sane. Like I met a lot of farmers and they're pretty grounded people. They've literally got their hands in the dirt. Again, I think there's a tribal element to this. I certainly feel a connection in the UK and Ireland where I'm from, deeper than I do here in Slovenia. So again, I think, people and land are linked. We don't have to go crazy on this, but they are linked. I think that's part of our mental health, is being of the land, being connected to the land. The people that go outside more, this is like way better for your mental health than sitting in an office talking about your feelings. The blah, kind of liberal vomit, feeling vomit. It's just gross. Some sort of like emotional bukkake. Blah. That's what liberal psychology is. It's disgusting. So they're the four connections. Body, community, land, spirit. That is what keeps people sane. That at the very least needs to incorporate a conservative point of view to do with personal responsibility, to do with boundaries, to do with God, let's just say it, God. It's okay to say it. God keeps you sane. I think these are the key points here. I really hope that psychology moves towards a conservative way of looking at things, that it at least incorporates that, and we question some of these mad activists. And you look at the universities who are funding the research on psychology, if it's still showing that conservatives are saner, like that research is biased, man. There's certain topics you just can't touch as a researcher in most modern universities. It's just impossible. So I think we'll actually see, if conservative universities were funding psychological research, we'd see this is way more strong a case than I'm making. But certainly it's already apparent. So yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that conservative approach incorporated. I feel like I'm missing something. What am I missing? In the comments, let's have a chat.